The police planted evidence on her, bought the judge, and thought they had destroyed her life. But they had no idea who they were dealing with. When the truth came to light, the system began to crumble, and the hunters became the hunted. What happened next will shock even the most seasoned minds. The city at night shimmered with neon lights as Samantha Williams stepped out of a small grocery store, carrying a bag with milk and bread. She wasn't in a hurry. The day had been tough, but she knew tomorrow would be even harder. Her work as a civil rights attorney was always a battle, but she was ready for it. Suddenly, 2 police patrol cars stopped right in front of her, blocking the sidewalk. Their doors swung open, and 3 officers stepped out, 2 in uniform and 1 in civilian clothes, walking with firm strides. The leader, Sergeant Paul Henderson, was familiar to Samantha. He had been involved in several cases of police misconduct. "Miss, hands up," he said flatly, stepping closer. "What's the matter?" Samantha didn't move. Her heart quickened, but she knew that panic was the worst response. "We have information linking you to illegal drug trafficking." "That's a lie. You have no grounds," she began. But one of the officers, the one standing to her left, had already shoved his hand into her jacket pocket. Well, what do we have here?" he smirked, pulling out a small bag of white powder. The street fell silent. Someone had already pulled out a phone and started recording. "This is a setup, and you know it." Samantha's voice remained steady. "You can explain it at the station." Henderson shrugged indifferently and forcefully twisted her arms behind her back, snapping the handcuffs on. "Someone record this," Samantha called out to the bystanders, but at that moment she was shoved toward the police car, her head roughly pressed against the hood. "Shut up," Henderson hissed. "We've seen cases like this before," the second officer sneered. "You think your big words will change anything? I'm a lawyer. I know my rights. Congratulations. But tonight they won't help you." The crowd kept recording, and Samantha realized this was her only chance. Someone shouted, "This is outrageous! We all saw them plant that on her." "Back up!" an officer yelled, waving his baton. The people stepped away, but didn't lower their phones. The officers shoved Samantha into the back seat of the police car and climbed in. "You've been a thorn in our side for a long time, Miss Williams," Henderson chuckled, starting the engine. "Time to settle the score." The car sped off, and Samantha stared out the window, realizing she had been dragged into a dirty game. But she wasn't going to give up. Samantha was thrown into a cold cell with concrete walls. The handcuffs were still on her wrists. The officers hadn't even bothered with basic rights. No phone call, no lawyer. But she knew that Darius Miller, her assistant, was surely looking for her by now. A few hours later, she was taken to an interrogation room. Sitting across from her was the same Henderson with his partner, Detective Bryant, beside him. "You need to sign a confession." Henderson smirked, tossing a document onto the table. Samantha slowly raised her eyes. "Even if I were foolish enough to sign this, your farce would still fall apart in court." Bryant leaned in closer. "Don't be so sure. Judge Lander is our guy. He's handed down the right verdicts before." Samantha's heart tightened. Lander, one of the most corrupt judges in the city. His rulings always favored the police. "The trial is tomorrow," Henderson stated calmly. "And if you want the minimum sentence, I'd suggest you cooperate." Samantha met his gaze with ice-cold defiance. "When the truth comes out, you'll both regret this." Bryant laughed. "Such confidence. Don't forget who runs this city." The next morning, she was led into the courtroom. Judge Lander was already seated at the bench, tapping his fingers on the desk as if eager to be done with the case. Darius was waiting for her and got straight to the point. "Your Honor, we have evidence that the incriminating material was planted. Furthermore, witness statements confirmed that the officers failed to follow standard procedure. We request the immediate release of Miss Williams. Lander didn't even glance in his direction. Motion denied. The defendant will remain in custody without bail. Samantha clenched her fists. Everything was going exactly as they had planned. This is a blatant violation of the law, Darius protested. One more word and you'll be removed from the courtroom, Lander replied coldly. As Samantha was led away, Henderson walked past her and threw out a final remark. Welcome to reality. But they had made one mistake. Samantha never gave up. Sitting back in her cell, she was already thinking about how to tear their scheme apart. Samantha sat in her jail cell, analyzing the situation. Judge Lander was in the police department's pocket. The officers had planted evidence and the entire system was working against her. But she had one ace up her sleeve: her name. She knew Darius wouldn't let this go. He was young, but damn smart. And if anyone could turn the tide, it was him. At that moment, Darius was already in action. He contacted journalists and sent them copies of the arrest footage. The video showing officers discovering drugs in Samantha's pocket spread like wildfire across social media. Comments flooded in. Another case of fabricated evidence. We demand justice. Why are black citizens arrested without proof? Where's the mayor? Where's the prosecutor? Why are they silent? The video went viral. Within hours, the case made national headlines. But the police weren't backing down. An emergency press conference was called at the department. Henderson stood beside the police chief as they faced the cameras. We are investigating the matter, the chief stated officially. But we urge the public to remain calm and trust the justice system. Yet, by that evening, the situation was out of control. Hundreds of people gathered outside the courthouse, holding signs. Free Samantha Williams. No more police corruption. As the protest grew, an unexpected turn unfolded inside the police department. Eric Donovan, a rookie officer, sat in the break room watching the news. He had been there the night of the arrest. He had seen Henderson plant the evidence. His hands shook as he realized he was part of a crime. Late that night, he dialed Darius' number. I need to talk. I was there. I can prove Samantha's innocent. Darius froze. This was the breakthrough they needed. The next morning, Donovan went public. He stood before the press and told the truth. The evidence was fabricated, and Lander knew about it. The police scrambled to contain the scandal, but it was too late. The prosecutor's office launched an investigation, and the public demanded Samantha's immediate release. The system was cracking. The only question was, how far would those in power go to hold on? The courtroom was packed to capacity. Journalists, activists, and ordinary citizens eagerly awaited the hearing. Samantha was brought in from her cell, her face calm but her eyes filled with determination. She knew that today would decide everything. Judge Lander had been replaced by federal Judge Ann Harris, known for her integrity. The prosecutors had no choice but to act. Donovan's testimony and public pressure made them accomplices if they delayed. Today, we are reviewing the case of Miss Williams, Harris began, fixing her gaze on the prosecutors. Is your side prepared to present evidence? Darius stood up. Your Honor, we have video footage proving that the arrest was fabricated. Additionally, Officer Donovan has testified that Sergeant Henderson planted the evidence. The courtroom erupted in murmurs. Order in the court, the judge said firmly, striking the gavel. The prosecutors stalled, citing a lack of evidence, but Harris wasn't one to tolerate games. I am ordering that Officer Henderson and Judge Lander be brought to court to testify, she declared. At that moment, the doors burst open. Henderson was led in, already in custody, his face flushed with rage. "This is a farce," he shouted. But the judge cut him off. "You will speak when given permission." When Donovan took the stand, he told everything: how Henderson planted evidence, how Lander accepted bribes to hand down rulings. It was a devastating blow to the system. "I had no choice," Donovan finished, "but I can't stay silent any longer." Judge Harris called for a recess. The nation held its breath, waiting for the verdict. 2 hours later, Samantha was brought back to the courtroom. Judge Harris looked directly at her and announced, "Miss Williams, all charges against you are dismissed. You are free to go." The courtroom exploded in cheers and applause. People stood, shouted, cried, but this was only the first step. In the weeks that followed, Henderson, Lander, and their accomplices were placed under investigation. Public pressure forced the government to begin reforms in both the police department and the judicial system. Standing before a sea of journalists, Samantha declared, "This is not just my victory. This is a victory for everyone fighting for justice. We have broken one part of this system, but there is still so much work ahead." Her voice was strong. Her fight had only just begun.